A photograph captures a moment in time, but sometimes behind the smiles.
I can't get back in the terrace house.
On May 11th, 2012, in the early hours of the morning, a fire would tear through this home in Derby, England. 6 children would lose their lives. But as investigators would soon discover, this wasn't just a tragic accident. This is the story of how a father's obsession with control and revenge led to an unthinkable crime, one that would make even hardened detectives cry. To the British public, Mick Philpott was a tabloid curiosity, a man who lived with his wife, his girlfriend, and his ever-growing family of children. But behind this carefully crafted image of an unconventional but loving father lay a much darker truth. Long before he became notorious for his unusual lifestyle, 19-year-old Mick Philpott had already shown signs of the monster he would become. His first victim was a 15-year-old girl named Kim Hill. Kim thought she had found love. Instead, she had walked into a nightmare. The abuse started slowly, a push here, a slap there. But soon, Philpott's violence escalated. He broke her arm with a hammer for paying too much attention to a child she was minding. He shot her with a crossbow because he didn't like her dress. Even in public, no one dared intervene when he struck her across the face with a pool cue. Years later, Kim would say, "Don't say no to Mick Philpott. You don't say no to him. He doesn't understand the word." When Kim finally found the courage to leave him, Philpott's response would reveal his true nature. He went AWOL from the army, broke into her home, and attacked her in her bed. As Kim lay bleeding from 27 stab wounds, Philpott told arriving paramedics, "I wouldn't bother. She's a goner. I've done a good job on her." But the system failed to recognize the danger he posed. After serving just 3 years of his sentence, Philpott was released, and he wasn't done, not even close. Over the next 3 decades, Philpott would perfect his pattern of control, manipulation, and violence. He would father 17 children with multiple women. But to him, these weren't just families, they were commodities. Each new child meant more government benefits. Each new partner meant another source of income he could control. And as his empire grew, so did his need for absolute power over everyone in his life. By 2012, Philpott had settled into a 3-bedroom council house in Derby with his wife Mairead, his mistress Lisa Willis, and 11 children. But when one woman finally found the courage to break free, it would trigger a chain of events that would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. To maintain his growing empire of benefits and control, Mick Philpott had created something unprecedented. A household with 2 women and 11 children, all under his absolute authority. In 2003, Philpott married Mairead Duffy, a teenage single mother who thought she'd found her guardian angel. His mistress, Lisa Willis, served as bridesmaid. But this wasn't a story of modern polyamory. It was a calculated system of control. The arrangement was simple. Both women worked while Philpott stayed home. Both handed over their wages. Both surrendered their benefits. All while Philpott controlled every aspect of their lives. His control extended to the most intimate aspects of their lives. Philpott lived in a caravan in the garden where his wife and mistress would alternate nights with him. Conservative MP Anne Widdecombe, who spent a week documenting his lifestyle, noticed something disturbing. While the children played outside, tension was building within the walls of 18 Victory Road. Lisa Willis, who had come to the household as a vulnerable 16-year-old orphan, was beginning to see through Philpott's manipulation. In 2010, Philpott was cautioned for dragging Mairead outside by her hair. He hit Lisa with a piece of wood, threw hot coffee at her, and prevented her from speaking to any men. But the children kept the benefits flowing, and Philpott wasn't about to let that go. Then, on a cold February morning, Lisa made her move. She told Mairead she was taking her 5 children swimming. Instead, she did something that would shatter Philpott's carefully constructed world. She escaped. But Mick Philpott wasn't about to let go of his control or his benefits without a fight. And in his twisted mind, he began to formulate a plan that would have devastating consequences. After Lisa Willis fled with her 5 children, Mick Philpott's control began to crumble. A custody hearing was scheduled for May 11th, a date that would soon become tragically significant. But Philpott wasn't just losing control of Lisa's children. He was losing £1,000 per month in benefits. For a man whose entire identity was built on dominance and money, this was unthinkable. In the weeks leading up to the custody hearing, Philpott, along with his wife Mairead and their friend Paul Mosley, devised a plan. They would set fire to their own home while the children slept upstairs. Philpott would then heroically rescue them, framing Lisa for the arson. But before we continue with what happened next, we need to remember who these children were. Not just victims of a tragedy, but 6 unique, precious lives. Jade was 10 years old. Her teachers described her as exceptionally bright, always eager to learn. 9-year-old John was known for his cheerful smile and politeness. He never failed to hold the door for his teachers. Jack, 7, was the quiet one. Though reserved, his presence brought joy to everyone around him. 6-year-old Jesse was the family's little comedian. His loud, infectious laugh could light up any room. Jaden, just 5, was shy and loving. His teachers remembered how he always wanted extra cuddles. And 13-year-old Duane, Mairead's son from a previous relationship, had taken on the role of protector for his younger siblings. None of them knew that their father's desperate need for control would soon rob them of their futures. In the early hours of May 11th, just hours before the custody hearing, Philpott's plan was set in motion. But what happened next would shock even the most hardened detectives. The fire spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within minutes, temperatures in the upstairs bedrooms reached over 500 degrees Celsius, creating conditions that made survival impossible. Firefighters would later testify that the fire had been started deliberately. Petrol had been poured through the letterbox. But something in Philpott's behavior at the scene caught their attention. While other family members were inconsolable, Philpott's behavior seemed off. A mortuary manager would later report that during visits to see his children's bodies, Philpott engaged in horseplay, even putting a family liaison officer in a headlock. But as Philpott performed for the cameras, investigators were already uncovering disturbing evidence. A discarded petrol container and glove were discovered near the house. But the most damning evidence would come from Philpott himself. Police had placed recording devices in the hotel room where the Philpotts were staying. What they captured would reveal the truth behind the tragedy. The ladder found at the back of the house was part of Philpott's original plan. He had intended to climb up and rescue the children, painting himself as a hero. But the fire had spread too quickly, too intensely. His plan for revenge had turned into something far more horrific. Jade, John, Jack, Jesse, Jaden, and Duane. 6 innocent lives lost to their father's twisted need for control. But as investigators would soon discover, the horror of that night was just the beginning. As the true horror of what happened at 18 Victory Road became clear, the community that had once defended Mick Philpott watched in disbelief as the evidence mounted. The investigation revealed disturbing details about the night of the fire. Hours before setting the blaze, Philpott had orchestrated a sexual encounter between his wife Mairead and their accomplice Paul Mosley, a twisted attempt to ensure Mosley's loyalty to their plan. On April 2, 2013, justice finally came. Mick Philpott, Mairead Philpott, and Paul Mosley were found guilty of manslaughter. Philpott received a life sentence with a minimum of 15 years. His wife and Mosley each received 17-year sentences. But for many, the sentences seemed inadequate for the lives of 6 children. The tragedy exposed devastating failures in the system. Failures to recognize patterns of abuse, to protect vulnerable women and children, and to stop a man who had shown his capacity for violence decades earlier. In 2020, Mairead Philpott was released after serving just half her sentence. She was given a new identity for her protection. Paul Mosley was released in 2021, returned to prison for breaching parole, and was released again in 2023. But while some have found freedom, 6 children will never grow up, never graduate, never fall in love, never have families of their own. Jade, John, Jack, Jesse, Jaden, and Duane, their lives cut tragically short by the very person who should have protected them most. Herman Thompson's calls went unanswered. Each ring echoed with growing dread. His son had never gone this long without calling. The restaurant staff hadn't heard from their boss. The boys hadn't shown up at summer camp. Something was terribly wrong. When police finally entered the Thompson house on July 17th, they found a home that had been transformed. The kitchen floor, intact during their visit just 2 weeks earlier, had been completely torn out. The bathroom fixtures, once white, were now painted a suspicious shade of red. But most telling of all was what they didn't find: any trace of the Thompson family. Kenneth had an explanation for everything. The renovations? Just long-planned improvements. The missing floor? Water damage? The red bathroom? Lydia's choice? The missing family van that he was now driving? They'd taken another vehicle on their trip. Each answer raised more questions, but without bodies, without evidence, the police's hands were tied. The house on South Calumet Avenue held its secrets tight. Every room echoed with the absence of a family that had once filled it with life. The boys' beds were still made, their toys untouched. School backpacks hung by the door, waiting for children who would never return. In the kitchen, a calendar still marked with family plans stood as a silent witness to futures erased. 1 year after the Thompson family vanished, FBI agents surrounded a trailer in Gary, Indiana. Kenneth White had used the money from selling his sister's house to buy this modest home. But buried beneath the everyday facade, agents would find the first physical evidence of what might have happened to the Thompsons. Hidden in a cramped crawl space, investigators discovered items that sent chills down their spines: men's gym shorts and a child's sock, both soaked in blood. The same white shoes the restaurant manager had noticed, now stained a permanent rust red. But even these grim discoveries wouldn't be enough to close the case. Kenneth was arrested, not for murder, but for forging Lydia's signature on a $3,272 check. The evidence of financial fraud was clear. The evidence of something far worse remained circumstantial. As investigators built their case, Kenneth's behavior grew increasingly erratic. On Christmas morning, 1997, guards found Kenneth White's body in his cell. He had fashioned a noose from his bedsheet, leaving behind no confession, no explanation, no answers for a family desperate to know the truth. The Thompson family vanished without a trace in the summer of 1996. Today, their case remains one of Chicago's most haunting mysteries. No bodies were ever found. No concrete evidence ever surfaced. Just a house with a missing floor, a bathroom painted red, and the echoing question of what really happened on that July afternoon.